What's up, everybody? Welcome to another NFL Deep Dives episode. Today we have the Buffalo Bills coming in at number 26 in my power rankings. This is pretty much on par with where most people are going to have them. The one thing I will say, and this is actually pretty reflective of the state of their franchise right now, is they're alone in this sort of purgatory of a tier. What I mean is every team I've covered to this point has been a cellar dweller who I don't really see having a chance of making the playoffs at all. And every team I will cover following this point at least has the potential to do that. As for the Bills, every time I stop to think about this team, they bounce between these two spectrums inside my head. On one hand, this was the best rushing team in football in 2016. People assume it was the Cowboys, but in fact, as you can see right here, Buffalo was first in rushing by a significant margin. And traditionally, teams that run the ball can win football games consistently. But then you look at this team's passing game and their defense, and it gets incredibly suspect. To me, their ability to win football games is going to come down to having a favorable matchup, dependent to where they will need to play defenses who struggle against the run and have poor offenses. As for their offseason, they lose Zach Brown, who was incredible at middle linebacker last year. They lose 4 starters in the secondary in Corey Graham, Aaron Williams, Nickel Roby-Coleman, and of course Stephon Gilmore going to the Patriots. So I think the defense struggles quite a bit, at least earlier in the year, as they transition to a 4-3 defense. They also did very little in terms of adding weapons to the offense, and for this reason I have Buffalo coming in at 5 wins, which is just below their over-under according to Bovada at 6. They're also 100-1 to win the Super Bowl and 7-1 to take the division. Now, this is a team in major transition, so I am excited to break down this depth chart. It's also a team that doesn't get too much coverage, so hopefully you learn a thing or two about how this team stacks up. And to mix things up, I'm going to start with this defense that is making the transition back to a 4-3 under Sean McDermott after 2 years in Rex Ryan's aggressive 3-4 scheme. And just as a reminder, I am showing you my 2017 real roster, but if I mention players that aren't visible to you, it is because Madden's interface for roster editing is far from perfect and I can't get every player in there. So starting at defensive end, we have Shaq Lawson, who was really trying to recover from a injury that he suffered early in preseason, I believe, and he never really got it going. He does project better as a down edge lineman. He was playing stand-up linebacker, kind of out of position for him. So he kind of gets a fresh restart with the new head coach, McDermott, and we'll see if he can actually establish himself as an edge rusher. I think he projects best as that complementary edge rusher. And then Jerry Hughes on the other side, and he's a player I talked about quite a bit last year. His Pro Football Focus grade is surprisingly low, which Madden's ratings put a lot of emphasis on their Pro Football Focus grade, and this is a big reason I do my roster, which I've talked about a lot, but 66.5 Pro Football Focus grade, which is, 64th among the position. That's way too low. Sure, he might have his flaws, but he is a really good player and knows how to make plays, so he comes up in my roster quite a bit, almost like 10 overall. He's a really nice player, and he got paid quite a lot of money to be a big feature of their defense, and he comes right back and gets to be a down lineman again. Whether he's a better outside linebacker or a DN, that's yet to be said, but regardless, I really like Jerry Hughes. At depth, they bring in Ryan Davis from Dallas, who had a pretty good rotational role in Dallas last year. He'll do the same thing here in Buffalo. Max Valles, Eddie Yarbo, Jake Metz rounding out the edge rushers there. I would say it's a 3-deep group. Maybe Max Valles gets involved. And then you move inside. Marcel Darius and Kyle Williams gets to play defensive tackle again, where he really dominated several years ago before they switched to a 3-4. So in general, this is a really good D-line. And then Adolphus Washington really broke out as a rookie last year, and now he's going to be a rotational guy. And then DeAndre Coleman, Jarrell Worthy still in the league. He actually played pretty well last year, so him and Adolphus Washington will rotate in there with Williams and Darius. And then Marcavis Lewis, Nigel Williams, an interesting undrafted free agent. So a pretty good group among the D-line there. And then you get to the linebackers. This group is going to be pretty suspect this year. I mentioned earlier that Zach Brown is leaving. He goes to Washington, and he was really the heart of this defense last year. They do get Reggie Ragland back. Probably a big reason they let Brown go was with high expectations for him. So does he really establish himself as a guy that probably should have gone in the first round last year if it weren't for that injury? So if he's healthy, he could really emerge here. Preston Brown is actually listed not as a starter. It's hard for me to think that he's not going to get on the field. He is really just a good run stuffer, so I would think first and second down we'll still see a lot of Preston Brown. Ramon Humber, Lorenzo Alexander going to be playing outside linebacker. We'll see. I mean, he broke out last year at 33 years old. Smart player. I'm sure they'll use him a lot in zone coverage and rushing the passer. They do draft Matt Milano and Tanner Vallejo to add some depth there. I like Milano as a guy that could develop in this group. And then Gerald Hodges was signed, Jacob Lindsey. Max Vela is also listed as an outside linebacker, so a little combo role there. They do have Ian Seau, Carl Bradford, so a bunch of journeymen really at the back of this depth chart trying to fill out the starters here for this linebacking group that is pretty thin now after some departures. And then the secondary got hit even worse in this offseason. They will have 4 starters to replace after Gilmore and Nickel Roby Coleman leave. Both their safeties leave as well. So at corner, their starters will be Ronald Darby and Tre'Davious White, who I'm okay with White. There was other corners that I liked better in the draft, like King and Awuzie. But a good athlete. Supposed to be a pretty smart guy, so should be able to plug in and play that outside corner. And then who's going to be their nickel back? Is it Kevin Seymour? Probably going to be Sharice Wright, actually. Sharice Wright played pretty well as a nickel back for Baltimore last year. I actually had him as one of my risers throughout the year, so I would think he'll come in and start there in the nickel. He's just sort of got that nasty tenacity against the run, and he's not great in coverage, but he really steps up in the run game, and I like that about him. Leonard Johnson, Steve Sylvie, and Charles James II, the Hard Knocks hero from a few years ago. He gets exposed for his size a decent amount, but he's kind of an instinctive player, and he tries as hard as he can at his height, so he'll probably get on the field. I would think he'll be their sort of 4th guy, and then Greg Mabin, undrafted rookie. At safety, you have Micah Hyde coming in, a huge contract from Green Bay. It looks like they're going to ask him to be a traditional safety. That's a little different than what he did in Green Bay, but he is kind of a do-it-all secondary player. No elite traits, but a really smart, instinctive player who is going to make some plays probably just because he does it every year. Whether or not he was worth the massive contract they gave him, I don't think so. Just because his upside doesn't really reflect the number they gave him. It was like $40 million. And then Jordan Poyer will be the starting free safety here. And they'll be backed up by Colt Anderson coming over from Indianapolis, Shamil Gary, Joe Powell, Trey Elston. Pretty weak group of safeties there. I would think that's going to be a point of emphasis in future off seasons. And then moving on to the offense, Tyrod Taylor is the starter, obviously, but does he keep the job throughout the whole year? There's been a lot of strange talks about them trying to move on from him. I guess I understand it. He's probably not a true franchise quarterback, but he can definitely be a good quarterback if they build everything around him. They do draft Nathan Peterman, my favorite quarterback in this draft, who, if you've been following my channel, you understand how much I love Nathan Peterman. I think he is absolutely ready to come in and start. I thought he had the best pocket awareness, the best accuracy, the best ability to extend plays out of any quarterback in this class. I think he's going to give Tyrod a run for his money. I'm not going to predict him to start right away, but I would not shy away from saying that if this team struggles, that they give Nathan Peterman the starting job by maybe mid-season at the earliest, but by the end of the year, week 16, 17, I think we could definitely see Nathan Peterman or Cardale Jones, the big Ohio State guy who is he definitely has some flaws to him, but does have an absolute cannon of an arm and kind of a poor man's Ben Roethlisberger, and TJ Yates also on the depth chart. I think the likely scenario is Tyrod finishes the year, and then maybe they reevaluate the situation in the offseason, and it's really going to come down to how many games this team can win. At running back, LaShawn McCoy is the guy, clearly, as they do not really address this position in the offseason at all. I love LaShawn McCoy. I'm going to talk a lot about him in the fantasy section. Jonathan Williams is the backup, and just because they didn't bring anyone in, I'm very intrigued to see what Jonathan Williams has to offer. 5th-round pick out of Arkansas from a couple years ago, a big back out of a power run offense there. And I think he will definitely succeed behind this offensive line if anything happened to LaShawn McCoy, but it is going to be McCoy's backfield. The backups, Joe Banyard, Cedric O'Neal, Jordan Johnson. I don't expect anything from those guys. And then fullback, they paid both Patrick DeMarco and Mike Tolbert a decent amount of money, so they are set at fullback, I guess. At wide receiver, you got Sammy Watkins, and can he stay healthy? I mean, he is, as you can tell by my Madden rating here, he is still one of the best players at receiver in football. But that nagging injury on his, I believe it's his foot, he's healthy now, and a lot of positive reports coming out of Buffalo, and really their success this season might hinge on the health of Sammy Watkins. He is that type of talent. We have yet to see him stay healthy for a full season. And then Zay Jones is the backup, the 2nd-round pick out of East Carolina. I was not a fan. I mean, I personally could not justify taking Zay Jones over, say, Chris Godwin or a guy I really liked who ended up going in the 3rd round in Kenny Golladay. I just don't think Zay Jones has the upside of a 2nd-round pick. I mean, he has great hands, but he's not an exceptional athlete. He's not super quick, and he is very thin. I think he's going to really struggle to separate at the next level, and I think he's going to be a fine wide receiver too. He might reach that potential of like a Marvin Jones, who's become the standard of a wide receiver 2 in the NFL today. But I just don't see the upside in Zay Jones, and I really question that pick. And then Corey Brown, I actually think we'll see a lot of, at least in the slot. And Corey Brown, I talked a ton about going into last season as a guy that he was, for whatever reason, people were saying Cam Newton doesn't have any good weapons, and I thought Corey Brown is a very solid receiver. I think he's everything Randall Cobb is in Green Bay. And then I went and looked at his drops for that year, and he was actually like 3rd or 4th in the NFL in fewest drops per target. So I think Corey Brown is actually going to be a better version than Zay Jones. And then Andre Holmes comes in from Oakland. He might emerge as sort of a red zone threat. And then rounding out the depth chart, they do have Jeremy Butler, Walter Powell, Brandon Tate, the kick returner, Desmond Lewis, Rashad Ross, Rod Streeter, a bunch of journeymen. So who ends up finishing out this depth chart? There'll be some competition in the training camp this summer. At tight end, Charles Clay is the guy. Very average tight end in my opinion. He will block, he will catch, but he's not really elite in either regard. I guess he's above average in terms of run blocking, that's for sure. Nick O'Leary, tough-minded tight end, doesn't even wear gloves out there. I like his game, but very low upside tight end. Wes Saxton, and then Logan Thomas, the former Virginia Tech quarterback, making the transition. Hey, you never know. I don't think anyone expected Terrell Pryor to make the boom that he did at receiver, so maybe Logan Thomas can do that. We have seen Marquise Gray converting in Miami become a success story of sorts. So maybe we start to see a decent amount of Logan Thomas. And then wrapping up with the offensive line, it's a pretty good group. Especially they draft Deion Dawkins to play right tackle in the 2nd round, which was definitely their weak point with Jordan Mills starting at right tackle. So left to right, you got Cordy Glenn and Richie Incognito, a very good combo there on the left side. Eric Wood, he's fine. He's just kind of a placeholder, smart center. John Miller, a guy that's still growing, but a good run blocker. And then, Deion Dawkins is going to come in and start at right tackle, it looks like. And the depth, they got Vladimir Dukas, Jordan Mills still there, Patrick Lewis, Ryan Groy, Michael Olas, and Ciantrell Henderson still on the depth chart. So pretty deep group, really good offensive line. Definitely top 10 to 12, I would say, especially if Deion Dawkins can be a good right tackle. And this is a group that really showed high efficiency in the run game with the year that they had becoming the number 1 rushing team in football. So now we're going to jump over and talk some fantasy football, maybe how some of these guys are going to pan out offensively and statistically, starting at quarterback. And by the way, it's exciting to get into some teams that actually have some fantasy relevant players, because these bottom dweller teams really don't have a lot of exciting players on offense. Anyway, Tyrod Taylor at quarterback is currently being the 20th drafted quarterback, and he finished as the 8th quarterback last year, so I think 20th is a little low. I know he's not super flashy, but those rushing yards are nice. It gives you a nice baseline. I think he outperforms Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco, Eli Manning probably, and then probably one more between like Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott, maybe Kirk Cousins. I think he will finish somewhere around the 15th quarterback, so not as high as he did last year. But I do like him as a streaming option if you're going with a late round quarterback approach, or if it's a 2-quarterback league. I think he should be right at that turn of second tier starters, right in the middle of that second group. If you're in a dynasty league, definitely take a look at Nathan Peterman late if you want to follow my advice. I really like him. I think he's going to develop really well. LaShawn McCoy, starting with the running backs now. He's the 4th drafted running back. So we have our first player that is going in the first round now with this series. And LaShawn McCoy going 8th overall, 4th running back. I would actually take him a few spots higher. I think he has a decent chance to outscore Zeke Elliott if he can stay healthy. I know that's not a popular opinion. I know Zeke is definitely more fun, but I think LaShawn McCoy is going to have a monster year. They didn't bring in anyone. Mike Gillislee leaves, so it's his backfield, and this was the number 1 rushing offense in football. So those two pieces go together, plus the fact that LaShawn McCoy is a borderline Hall of Fame caliber running back. And LaShawn McCoy, there is no reason he can't finish as a top 3 running back. And then Jonathan Williams is, I mentioned, the backup, and he's starting to get noticed now, and the sooner you're doing your drafts, the later you'll be able to get him. But we saw Mike Gillislee have a ton of value last year as the backup, and Jonathan Williams honestly has more athletic upside than a guy like Gillislee. Right now, Jonathan Williams is finally in the drafted range according to Fantasy Football Calculator. He's going as the 63rd running back, and he is definitely one of the most demanded handcuffs in my opinion. And I would reach for him. I would take him early wherever those handcuffs start to go. I would definitely eye him early, especially because this running game is super effective and efficient, and Jonathan Williams is the clear-cut backup. I don't think Joe Banyard is going to cut into those carries. And then at wide receiver, Sammy Watkins going 22nd among wide receivers, and I think that's fair. If you look at the guys ahead of him, I like their upside enough to justify taking them ahead of Sammy Watkins, who has injury problems. Watkins has top 10 upside, obviously, but that injury risk is massive. He's never played a whole season. I'm fine with taking a risk on him in the 5th round, and if you think you have a solid foundation in the first 4 rounds, if you go with someone more risky, maybe like a Gronkowski or, Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen, some of those bigger risk guys, I don't think I'm taking Sammy Watkins just because it's too much risk. And I also like Martavis Bryant better going a few spots later. But the upside is totally worth it at this point if you haven't taken any big swings. But I don't think I would take him anything past being my 5th player drafted. Then Zay Jones is going 65th among wide receivers. If you want to take a swing at that, there's very little risk. Personally, I like Corey Brown better for this year. If you're in a dynasty league, sure, Zay Jones. But I think Corey Brown is, without injury to Watkins, I think Corey Brown is better. And I think if Watkins does get hurt, Corey Brown is going to become the safety guy for Tyrod Taylor, which he'll probably be about the equivalent of what Robert Woods was last year. So not a ton of huge upside there, but I do like Corey Brown as a solid slot receiver. And then Charles Clay, currently being undrafted. He's not exciting. He's not flashy. He's very much a meh player. He's probably gonna he will outperform his draft position of beyond the 23rd tight end, but he probably isn't going to finish as a top 10 tight end, and you definitely want to swing for upside at tight end. So I would rather take a chance on a rookie, maybe a David Njoku, at tight end late in your draft. And then if your rookie doesn't pan out, just pick up Charles Clay because he's probably going to be available. Defensively, I think this group struggles. They have some upside, but the secondary concerns me, and the offense isn't so explosive or dominant that this group is going to really be playing with the lead, which is kind of what you want in a fantasy defense. So that does it. Bills fans, let me know in the comments below if you think I got it right or if you think I had some oversight on maybe a few players. And then everyone, you still have about 24 hours to take part in the John Ross Madden Ultimate Team giveaway. It's on Twitter at TFG_football. So peace out, everyone. We'll see you for the next one.